Well, all right. Welcome back to another episode of Generation to Generation, Bridging the Gap with Rex
and Eva.
And we are so excited to hang out with you guys this week. This is going to be another quick episode because we are moving at rapid fire.
We really are.
We are. I mean, we got way too much on our plates, but so does everybody else.
No. But it's funny because you try and put, we talk about this on the podcast time, but you try and put him, who has like a full-time job, and he's always in meetings, and then me, who I'm a high school student, and I do work, but it's like the weirdest hours, and so I'm about to go like take a nap after this, and you're about to go to work, and so it's really funny because like our schedules never align, because then when you're free, I'm at work, or I'm doing something, or I've got school, and when I'm free, you got to go somewhere, and so it's rare we get these like 30-minute periods where we're totally free.
It is. It's almost bizarre. I'm like, oh my gosh, is our life really that busy? But it appears to be.
Yeah.
You know, I love our life. I love our flow. I love everything about it. It works well for us. But yeah, to your point, to put two of us in the same place for 30 minutes at a time.
And we're together a lot. We're just doing completely separate things. So You were in your office today working. I was in school. I woke up at like what? Because my Monday class and Wednesday classes are done. So I like woke up at like 9:30 today, which was weird not having a class at 8:30 anymore. But it was like, and the mama was gone before I even got out of bed, and you were working and I was working, and like yesterday I came home from work and you were asleep in your chair and I went straight to work, and so it's rare that like, yes, we're together a lot, but we're not doing things together a lot.
It's kind of crazy. So let's record a podcast in the time that we have, and we're celebrating 1 year of podcasting, which has been kind of cool. Last week, I did notice this. We said last week was episode 50. Well, actually, we've done 50 episodes if you include
Bridge Builders.
Yes.
Yeah, 50 total episodes.
Yeah.
But it's like 48 or whatever.
But my point is, when I went back and looked at it, I'm like, okay, we're talking about episode 50, but it's actually labeled, you know,
like
on
like 48 or
it's
whatever.
48 or something. So
it's because of Bridge Builders, guys.
Yeah, if we threw people off, our apologies. But at any rate, we are definitely approaching episode 50
of
with you and
show.
the main show, you and I together. And speaking of the main show, just to remind you, if you kind of forgot this, one of these days, Eva, my intent with this podcast is for you and I to continue to do a podcast together all through your college career, because I think that's going to be really fun and really insightful. So you're committed to me.
I am for 4 years.
For 4 years.
Hey, 6 years, because I'll be in college a lot longer than 4 with my master's.
But then as we kind of transition out of college, I may start to do maybe a side, whether it's called Bridge Builder or whatever it is, there may be a side podcast where Dad is just talking about a few things that are on Dad's heart. And I want you to have the freedom, if you'd like to do one where you get to totally direct the content and all of that.
Philosophical no, I'm kidding. I really love philosophy and talks and things like that. That's scary. Well, that's a good thing that's 4 years out.
Yeah,
I don't think.
But I want you to have the freedom to do that.
Yeah.
You know, to take that in a direction that you would really like to have some creative license, so to speak. So anyway, just a reminder to you, a reminder to our audience. But today, in last week's discussion, something came up with, I think, a mom that you were talking to.
No, my math tutor.
Your math tutor.
She was like, "Can you do an episode on this, because it's something like my like family like needs." And I said, sure, like I would love to. And I've been asked about it multiple times. And the topic is all about how to have dinner with people who don't agree with you politically or theologically or ethically, like things like that. Like how to have a dinner and how to still love each other and express that love, especially when one side of the table is trying to make amends and the other side is very hostile about it.
Yep.
And how to have that. And I think that is an important topic, because having a seat at the table is a big part of our message, is like sitting down at that table and talking. But sometimes people aren't ready to talk about it. And sometimes you have to be strong enough to say, this is something we don't discuss at the dinner table and things like that. Or sometimes it's, okay, well, why do you believe that way? I'll listen to you if you listen to me. And so that was something I really wanted to talk about this week.
Okay. Well, let's talk about it. And I do think it's a great question. I think it's a great observation. And we've mentioned it multiple times. We live in the most divisive culture ever. And so I think we do have challenges talking to people that are, have a different viewpoint. They maybe look different. They just have a different environment.
I was sitting at the
all
park
of
yesterday talking to a mom who has a very, very different lifestyle and belief system than I do. And we had a great conversation, but it just took us having to listen to each other and explain, what to them is common sense, but like is foreign concepts to me and vice versa. And we had this incredible discussion and we came to the terms like classically educated students. Like it was this completely different topics, but by the end of it, it was like we both came to an agreement that like classical studies are important. And it was like the craziest thing of how we started completely on the left side of the field, and by the end of the conversation we had like agreed upon something, but it just took us having to explain how we got there, and it was wonderful.
Love it. Okay, well, do you want to start with any particular observations you have, or do you want me to kind of lead off?
Why don't you start, because you sit at breakfast most days with people who are very divisive. You've talked about that before, and so how do you handle that?
Well, they're not divisive, but they're very aware of the divisiveness. And I do small groups almost every morning, and some of those are younger guys, some of them are older guys, some of them are
I was
mixed.
talking about the breakfast guys at the local breakfast spot that you've talked about too.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're getting at with that is one of the breakfast spots I go to is I have noticed that it tends to be an older crowd. And as everybody knows, the older we get, this is not an indictment on any generation, but it is a standard deal. As we tend to get older, we get more set in our ways and our views, even in our narratives. And I just made a decision years ago. I'm going to guard against that. I want to be able to listen to people. I want to be able to process different perspectives. And that requires, you know what I'm going to say, active listening.
Yep.
Not sitting here thinking about what I'm going to reply and what I'm going to say next and what my argument is. That's not active listening. Active listening is totally clued in to what the other person is saying and evaluating that and giving credence to that. And then once you've processed it, then you can respond. But if we're sitting at the table with the mindset of I am going to win the argument and I am going to prove my point regardless of what comes up. And let's face it, I think there's especially social media.
Yep.
We don't need to repeat that, but it's every day. It's clear that all people are interested in, and that's a generalization, but many people are interested in simply winning the argument. And I'm like, I'm not interested in the argument.
Not every conversation needs to be a persuasion.
No, and it's certainly not going to be that way on social media. Yeah. Whoever changed anybody's mind on Facebook? So let me say this, back to, hey, let's talk about some maybe principles when I sit down at the table with someone. Number one, every person's created in the image of God. And if that's our viewpoint as a family, that's our viewpoint as Christians. But I have found personally, Eva, that helps me tremendously. When I come to the table, if I simply remind myself I'm looking at a person that is created in the image of God, I don't care how different they are on the political spectrum, how different they are in terms of their educational level, their income level, I don't care what it is, that person created in the image of God. And in that moment, it changes my heart toward them, because I realize that I'm looking at someone that is uniquely crafted, they're uniquely designed, they have gifts, skills, talents, abilities that God placed in them, and I need to be very respectful and very mindful of the image that they carry. And so that just helps me be honoring and respectful right off the bat. I think that's number one for me.
Okay, what's number two?
Number two is God. And we've talked about this a lot. God gave us 2 ears, 1 mouth. Yep. Okay. The Bible says, be slow to speak, quick to listen. Okay. And I find that often, especially in this politically charged environment, we are quick to speak. We let our emotions get away from us. And I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to be controlled by my emotions, and I'm not going to overreact to someone's comment. Even if I 180 degrees disagree, I am going to listen with my two ears. I'm going to be reasonable, rational. There's another Bible verse. Jesus said, "Come, let us reason together." Jesus always reasoned with people out of the scriptures. And so that's what I want to do, is just sit down with people, have an open conversation, and let's reason together. We're the only quote unquote animal that God made that way. No other animal, no other species on the planet has the ability to reason except mankind. God gave us that for a reason. So you, with a classical Christian education, reason, logic, being able to put points on the table and defend those in a logical, rational way.
But it takes listening.
Yeah.
Because if you're only listening for your argument and things you can use to tear apart the other person or to further your argument, you're not listening. And it was really a beautiful discussion we just had in class. We're reading Chesterton's Orthodoxy, which is absolutely phenomenal. Oh my gosh, it's so well written. But a lot of different people's perspectives came to the table. During we were talking about just orthodoxy and the paradoxes of life and inhumane and liberalism in the Christian sense in the church. And it was very, very interesting. And there were a lot of different points that came to the table. And it was so respectful because people were listening. And they were saying, actually, like, even though we do have different like foundational theological, or even though we do have different pillars of our foundational theological beliefs, like I do agree with you on that. Like I can concede that, like, even though we come from very different backgrounds, like I agree with that statement. And it led to this beautiful, beautiful discussion. And I think that's something we, as a classically educated student who has studied logic and rhetoric, it's very easy to just listen for an argument. It's very, very easy to just listen for my side of it, what I need to hear to be able to further it, because I am taught in the art of persuasion and the art of and how to persuade people and how to build an argument, how to defend it. And so that is something that it's very easy for people to do. And I feel like especially in like the intelligent communities, it's very, very like intelligence communities, like where they're I don't know how to word that in academic communities. It's very, very easy to get caught behind the who's smarter and therefore they're right. But Chesterton, he had a great quote today, and it said, like, you know, oftentimes the people who speak with the most confidence in a room of crowded people are the ones that are spewing nothing but lies. And it's so interesting because it's like the same thing can be said at the dinner table, is like the people who come in believing that they're right, everybody else is wrong, or often don't have the full story of it. And it's the people that sit there and that listen and that they engage in the discussion that are often going to get the most out of it. And at the dinner table, that can be said about sports. If you come in believing that, the Dallas Cowboys are the greatest team in the NFL and you will not be changed on it, nobody's going to listen to you talk about back in their day because that's not relevant. But if you sit and you engage at the dinner table and talk about all the current teams, it's going to be a more engaging conversation because it's not one-sided. And that can be said about politics too. If you come to the dinner table, especially like Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter, which is just about to come up, and you want to talk about the politics side of it, don't come into it believing that you are completely right. Because as we've talked about in our previous episodes in worldview, your worldview, you may be correct in your worldview, but not everybody views the world the same way you do. And so you have to understand, especially like in America, living in a free country, we don't all have these universal beliefs and agreements. Like we're allowed to have different beliefs. And that at the dinner table, especially with bigger families, it's not everybody's going to agree the same. And just because they don't believe the same as you, they're not inherently wrong, because that's correct in their worldview. And you have to understand and you have to accept that, and you have to be an active listener and ask, well, why do you believe that? Can you explain to me like how you would approach this subject? And then say like, hey, I really like that. Can I explain why I believe it this way? And if you want to have that kind of discussion at the table, that's how you approach it, is not by going into it automatically assuming you're correct. But if it's a conversation where both parties are not going to be able to have a civil discussion, before you sit down, you say, like, today is a day we are celebrating family and being together, and this is not something we're going to bring up. I know we have different beliefs, and at the end of the day, we are still family. We still share the same blood, or we are still all sitting here at this table, and just because we have different worldviews that separate us, that doesn't mean that we can are separated entirely. Because, and I've said it before, like, people who let their loyalty to their party supersede their loyalty to a nation are the problem. And that's the same thing at the dinner table. If you can't concede and make concessions in certain areas, saying, well, we are family. Like, we are all sitting at this dinner table together. If you can't respect the loyalty and the honor that comes with that, then that's the issue. And so you have to sometimes set boundaries with it and just be like, hey, this is not something we're bringing up at the dinner table. I know you have different beliefs than I do. If that's something you want to talk about privately after dinner, great. But when we're all sitting at the dinner table, we're not going to engage in this kind of discussion. Let's find something else to talk about that we can have common ground on. And I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah, that's called setting boundaries.
Yeah.
And you know your family, you know your friends. We've got a very close friend that years ago just made the decision, hey, I can no longer watch the Iron Bowl with this group because we had a mixture of Alabama and Auburn fans, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But he is so intense in his fandom, which I'm totally cool with, but he just realized, hey, sometimes I get a little over the top, and if my team is not winning, it's going to be kind of difficult for me to be civil in that moment. And so he just removed himself from those particular Saturdays once a year. And I kind of chuckle about it, and I think it's awesome. Still part of the friend group. We love each other, but that's an example of a boundary.
Yeah.
Hey, it's not because I can't believe you mentioned the Dallas Cowboys.
It's just the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. It reminded me of 30 years of misery. But to that point, back in the day when the Cowboys were winning, especially when I was a teenager, if the Cowboys weren't winning, you didn't want to watch that game with me. I was immature. I was irrational. I was totally focused on a game. And as you age, you realize, well, I may never see another Super Bowl in my lifetime, Jerry Jones, but that's a whole different subject. But you get me. Yeah. You got to set what you're talking about is healthy boundaries.
It is. And I feel like that's something we could go into a lot more in episodes is boundaries and how we set them. But I also think you were talking about earlier how as you get older, we get set in our ways. And I do know a lot of our audience can be a little bit older or is a little bit older just from what I know and from the statistics. And it's almost a challenge too, is like you have a lot of experience in the world, right? Like that, there's no doubt in that. Like anybody who is older than me has more experience than I do in the world. But I do have unique experiences that bring unique perspectives to the table. And just because I haven't had the experience or I haven't lived through the things you've lived through doesn't mean that my opinions and my values and my beliefs are automatically disqualified. And if you want to engage in a civil discussion, you have to respect that. You can't. And we've talked about it a lot, but you can't get caught up in the back in my day stuff because, and I'm going to be blunt here, I don't care if it was back in your day. I love history, but if I'm trying to talk about a current event and you mention only about back in your day, well, back in my day, it was this, back in my day, is that. We don't live in your day. I want advice. I want help. I want guidance. I wouldn't be approaching you if I didn't want you to say, well, back in my day, we did this, but this is like the same value. And we've talked about that, like, with the recessions of past, whatever, when we've talked about recessions and things, it's like, oh yeah, like there is some values and principles we can take from that. This is the principle or this is the lesson I learned from it. But if you only ever live in the past, you're not helping the future. And that's something that I feel like at the dinner tables, you can change someone's life. Like what you happened with Warner Von Braun. Like you didn't even know there was this lady that he was talking to that he like changed her opinion of Warner Von Braun on, but had no idea she had a set opinion on it. By approaching things civilly and just respectfully and kindly, you can do a lot more. Your words have a lot more power. But if you come into it haughty and pretentious and set in your ways, no one's going to listen to you, and you're going to lose respect, especially in the younger generations. That's something that my generation very much is not afraid of doing. Is cutting people off that don't value our opinions, our times. And I think that can be unhealthy in some ways. I think my generation definitely overuses the term red flag, but I do think that there is a boundary between respecting the past and only living in it. And like we've talked about, your world ended when I was born and you started living in mine. And things like that. And so it's like at the dinner table, especially with multi-generational households or multi-generational dinners and things, you just have to be careful about how you approach it because there's so many ways, and teenagers are stupid. And the way my math tutor was talking about it with me, it was specifically her younger family member. She was having a hard time. We're stupid. We're stubborn. And so if you find a way to communicate with us that like means something and isn't attacking us, we're going to listen because not many people spare the same time.
Yeah, I think it's so good, Eva. There's a couple of things that I want to respond to in what you just said. Number one is, I feel like I'm kind of, even though I'm an older dad, I feel like I have a reputation as a cool dad.
You do.
Well, you know why I think that is because exactly what you just said. I do listen.
Yep.
And I'm not trying to tell. I have a lot of life experience. I have a lot of things I'd like to share with people, but I'm not going to do it, number one, if you don't ask. And number two, I'm not going to tell you the lesson learned unless I can correlate it to what's happening today. Yep. Hey, well, when you make a comment, well, I've always said, well, let me tell you the way we used to do that, but let me tell you what the principle is with that and how I think that applies to today. And you are the beneficiary of your grandfather, Paul, because he's the one that told me that. When I showed up, his world changed, and he knew that. And he told me, son, I realized my world doesn't exist anymore. It's your world, and I got to find a way to navigate and get in it so that I can relate to you. And I learned that from my dad, your grandfather. Yep. And I think our relationship has been so good because of that, because I've said this before, 18 for you is not 18 for me. Yep. It is a different world, different scenario. Principles are the same, but the way that you have to navigate the world, you and your generation, again, social media, iPhones, that's a huge part of it. It's just a different world. Yep. And so anyway, that's one. Let me go back to what you said about Warner Von Braun so that we give some clarity to the audience. Didn't even know this, but I was in Huntsville recently at a luncheon and I was talking to a couple after the luncheon, and it was just casual conversation. I had no idea, but I was talking about how much I enjoy going back to Huntsville because it's the first airplane flight that I ever took in my life. Back in the 70s, my family flew me from Memphis to Huntsville on the first Delta airline flight that I ever took. And Huntsville in the early 70s was totally different than Huntsville now. So I have seen the actual transition of Huntsville, but I've also seen the transition of Redstone Arsenal, NASA, the George Marshall Space Center, all of that, because I had an aunt and uncle that worked for NASA, not only worked for NASA, but they worked for Warner Von Braun, who is the father, essentially, of the NASA program, if you read it. So I just got to talking about my experience in Huntsville as a young 11-year-old guy coming to visit. And then, started talking about Warner Von Braun. And I said, they told me so many stories about him that I wish I would have listened, but I'm a farm kid from Arkansas. I don't have a clue. I don't have the proper context. They even took me to an Apollo launch. I can't remember which mission it was, but I actually saw one of the Apollo Saturn V rockets launch from Cape Canaveral. That was a big deal. And I look back on it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. You should have appreciated that more. Yes, but I wish I would have taken more notes about their Von Braun story. So anyway, I'm up at George C. Marshall Center about a year ago, and I noticed this biography, and it's called Dr. Space. And it is a biography written by a local reporter in Huntsville about the life of Warner Von Braun. It's my favorite biography ever. And I started talking about that book and how awesome it was. They started asking questions about it. And I started talking about the struggles that Warner Von Braun had because he was a Nazi officer. He was forced, along with other scientists, to be part of the Nazi Party to develop rockets, but Warner Von Braun never wanted a military application for rockets. His dream was always to put a man on the moon. And so if you know anything about World War II history, I got to make this quick. There was basically a race at the end of World War II between the Russians and the Americans to go there was a space race, but to go grab the scientists from Germany that knew and had developed the initial technology to basically grab them. And the first one that got to him, guess what? Was probably going to win the space program. Well, guess who got to him first? Americans did. And they brought him, read the book, they brought him to El Paso, Texas, and then they started looking for a place to figure out where they could grow this scientific community. Guess where they picked? Huntsville, Alabama.
Yep.
Well, I'm telling her the story of how Wernher von Braun led that group of scientists, how personable he was, how concerned for their welfare he was. In the book, he comes across extremely human, but the fact is a lot of people in America at the time did not trust him. They never trusted him because of his previous association with Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
It's this really interesting dichotomy. And the whole biography, though, just gripped me because it just did such a fantastic story or job at telling the story of this phenomenal, interesting person's life.
Yep.
And so I'm sharing this with this lady, okay? And she's fascinated. And then we get to the end of the conversation. She goes, "That's really interesting." She said, "I'm Jewish." And she said, "I've always hated him." But she said, "In your discussion of the book, you just gave me a totally, totally different perspective that I've never thought about." And I'm like, wow, I didn't even know that we were sitting here talking about perspectives. Yeah. I'm just talking about how much I love Huntsville and how passionate I am about that particular biography. But it was a moment for me. I'm like, you got to be you just have to be aware at any given moment. People are constructing narratives based on what you're saying, and you just have to be aware, listen to people, engage, and that's kind of a cool story.
It is.
So anyway,
it is really cool. And so I think the moral of this episode is just A, be an active listener. B, don't be afraid to set boundaries at the dinner table. And C, don't be afraid to step into someone else's worldview if it means you can communicate with them. It doesn't mean you have to change your worldview, but it means that if you listen to the perspective, you could come out of it with more knowledge than you thought.
I think it's so good. And remember, they are created in the image of God. They have a special, unique gift set. And it makes that conversation so much easier if you approach it with that way.
Yep.
So remember, regardless of what happens, let's always be able to talk from generation to generation.
Hey, if you enjoyed our episode, make sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a review because it helps people who don't know about us hear our message. And if you want to follow us on our socials, follow us at G2G_podcast on Instagram and Generation to Generation on Facebook.